Okay, good morning. It looks like this is my first live. It's been a minute since I have jumped in front of a camera and had an open conversation. And so I thought it was important for me to start doing lives because there's something that I'm seeing in the world right now. And I think it's something that people are feeling and that they're feeling it, they are experiencing it, but they don't necessarily have the language to articulate exactly what it is that they're seeing. And for me, it's when I look around, whether it's inside of relationships, communities, families, institutions, governments, we're experiencing a crisis of trust. And that crisis of trust is happening from the inside out. And it's taken me a really long time to understand that trust is more than just a feeling or a belief or something that exists between two individuals, that it is, in fact, a structure. And it's a structure that is replicated again from the inside out. And before I get into kind of the mechanics of trust as I see them, I think it's important to perhaps give you just a little context and background on why I have the perspective that I do and why I've taken the approach with trust that I have. And so my corporate experience has been a bit of a mixed bag, but the last 7 years of my career, corporate career, if you will, was spent inside of law and finance. And when I was working in the legal and financial industry, I was working predominantly in data management, organizational structures, and global centralization. And so when I was in Nova Scotia, I was working for one of the largest law firms in Atlantic Canada, and I was helping them build and centralize a new knowledge base, precedent library, and intranet. And that was really my first foray into understanding how information gets centralized and made accessible to organizations where minutes matter. So, how quickly you can access information, how reliable that information is, and how quickly you can convert that into something tangible that you can use. And from there, I was recruited to work offshore for one of the largest legal and financial companies in the world. And we were bringing to market the first centralized global entity services service. And so at the highest levels, we were consolidating and centralizing corporate administration for 12-figure companies. So I had a very intimate and in-depth look at what it means to bring and consolidate high-level information into a very specific dashboard and to be able to organize it in a way that you can stay jurisdictionally and legally compliant in every country in the world, but also be operating inside of policies, procedures, and workflows with teams of individuals that no matter where they were in the world, the process was the same, it was legally compliant, and we were working as efficiently and inside of our contracts as possible. So, where this got really interesting for me is that this particular perspective that I had and viewpoint prevented me from ever getting into the minutia and the weeds of what my clients were actually doing for business. So when I was working offshore, I could see that each of my clients had tens of thousands of companies all over the world. but it didn't actually matter what those companies were doing. I just needed to know how they fit inside of the structure. And so what I started to learn very quickly was that information had to be organized, and it had to be accessible, and it had to be retrievable at all times. And if something didn't have a defined place, it didn't just go into like a miscellaneous general file or junk drawer. We had to keep digging until we knew where it fit. And it really got me thinking at a basic human level, we don't do that. We don't know how to organize our lives. We don't know how to organize our individual beings as efficiently and as effectively as some of the largest private equity firms in the world. And it became this really interesting exploration for me to start understanding, well, how did we know that what worked in Delaware would work in Luxembourg, would work in Hong Kong? And that's when it started to become very obvious to me that the names change, the language changes, but the structure never does. And so how does all of this relate to trust? Well, they never left trust up to chance, right? We were working with these large corporations. They trusted us enough to be able to centralize their entire portfolio and trusted that we would do what we said we were going to do, how we said we were going to do it, consistently and reliably over time inside of the bounds of our contract. Pretty simple, right? But as basic as that information is and that knowledge is, when we bring it back to ourselves individually and apply those same principles to ourselves, something starts to happen. And I noticed it most. I noticed it most obviously during the pandemic, when trust was eroding at speeds I think that we've never experienced before, not in modern history. And it was because at the end of the day, regardless of where you sat ideologically, nothing felt stable. Perception was something that was really, really hard to stabilize during that time. And it's because perception can only be as stable as your ability to trust what you're seeing. So trust. What I started to realize as I was kind of navigating a variety of different situations and trying to find my footing between 2020 and 2022 was that there was this recurring loop that's always playing. And it's how we interpret the stories being told to us, but also how we tell stories about ourselves, about other people. And it's that everything fits very neatly inside of what I call the villain victim hero loop. And I call it the villain victim hero loop because if you go through media, politics, entertainment, marketing, almost any story that's ever told, in order to perfect it, requires someone is the victim, someone is the villain, and then the hero comes in to save the day. And it becomes almost this self-prophesizing loop that we get stuck in when you're constantly telling a story where those three roles need to be triangulated. And I started asking really hard questions. What happens when you start looking at a scenario and you can very clearly see that someone is being made the victim, someone is being made the villain, someone is being made the hero, but it doesn't line up with your perception of events? What if the person that you believe is the victim is maybe also the villain in that story? What if the person that we are looking at as the hero is also the victim or the villain? What if they're occupying all three? What does this begin to mean? And it started showing up for me every time I watched a news cycle, every time I ended up in various groups or factions or communities of people that saw the world a very specific way, and there was no room for nuance. There was no room for a slight shift in perspective, and reality was to be viewed in this very specific way, and that was that. And so I had to start getting really clear on who I was trusting and why I couldn't at all times trust my own perception, my own voice, the way that I was seeing the world. Um, what was causing me to get a little shaky? Where were the wobbles coming from? Where was I saying yes when I really meant no? And when I would retell the stories of my past or attempt to narrate what I was experiencing, was I attempting to fit these people, places, things, structures into these roles of the villain, victim, hero? And I was. And I had to come to the hard reality that maybe, just maybe, there's another way to start looking at these stories. And so that would be around the time the concept of the witness came in, because I'm observing what's happening around me. I'm watching it happen, but I'm not passively sitting back. I've never been a really passive person. I've never been able to just sit there and watch something play out and not do or say something. And so I'm sitting there watching various issues play out. And this is going back to the pandemic, where everyone was right. And in theory, that could be true. But what if everyone was also wrong? And I had to leave room for that. And so what I started doing was seeing exactly where someone was being the victim, where someone was being the villainizing something, where someone was trying to swoop in and save the day, and went, can't do that. Can't do that. You can't interfere with other people's path. You can't just insert yourself into someone's way of being because you believe yourself to be right. You can't stand there and demand autonomy for yourself while attempting to impose restrictions in your beliefs on someone else. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. And it first came up for me when I was having a conversation with a doctor out west, and they were trying to organize around how their colleagues were carrying out at that time, it would have been the mandated vaccines. And they were very specifically concerned about children. And I remember saying to this doctor, I understand what you're saying, and I understand why you're so concerned, but you can't stand on your platform and preach autonomy and demand autonomy and your right to choose while attempting to impose restrictions on other people and telling them they're not allowed to choose because what you believe is in opposition with what they believe. And people didn't like that. They really, really, really did not like being told that they had to sit back and just observe and let the cards fall where they wanted to. And so it made me really start to question my reality, the reality I was experiencing, and how I wanted to move forward. And going forward, who could I actually trust? Because I couldn't trust the government. I was losing trust in the groups and the communities that I was in. I couldn't trust the people that were closest to me because they were not stable themselves. And so at the end of the day, I had to learn how to trust myself. And it was in 2023 that I really started looking at the mechanics of trust from the inside out. And I had heard, I think I was maybe in a meditation, I had heard the word HALT. And HALT, the acronym HALT, came through to me as honesty, acceptance, loyalty, and trust. And in that order, in that system, it had to go in that particular sequence. And as I started moving through that sequence in my own life, it became abundantly clear to me that if you cannot be 100% radically honest with yourself, it makes it almost impossible to be able to accept anything that's happening, whether it's happening to you, happening around you, has happened in the past. When you can't be honest about what you're seeing, where you've been, who you've been, how you've been acting, and you can't accept the reality that your action, your participation is creating, well, it becomes almost impossible to not betray yourself. Loyalty becomes a really hard thing to secure. And if you are in a constant state of self-betrayal, you will never trust, ever trust what you're seeing, why you're seeing it, and whether or not you as an individual have the ability to act in right relationship with what you know to be true. And that was a really hard lesson. That was a really hard lesson, and it was a really hard pill to swallow, because you become acutely aware and you have to come face to face with all of the ways that you lie to yourself. And at the end of the day, no one will ever lie to you more than you already lie to yourself. No one will ever deny you and not accept you to a degree greater than you already don't accept yourself. No one will ever betray you more than you already betray yourself. And so if you do not believe yourself to be inherently trustworthy, you have to give up the expectation that anyone or anything around you is going to be trustworthy. And so what begins to build that trust? How do you then begin to start building trust and participating in meaningful ways so that you can start becoming a trustworthy person and a reliable point of contact, both with yourself and with the rest of the world? And it's something that can be hard to see within yourself first, but you can absolutely see it outside of you. And so I was doing a lot of civic work. I started doing a lot of civic work. And when I say civic work, I was looking at the different systems in the province of Nova Scotia and going, hey, wait a second, you're not doing what you said you're supposed to be doing. Why aren't you doing it? And this is where, going back to my experience working in law and finance, and specifically working at the global level and seeing, as I said earlier, the mechanics of trust, regardless of what country you're in, they're the same. When you are working globally, commercially, everything is being governed inside of kind of trust and securities law, commercial law. And most people, when they think legally, they think of trust, like wills and estates. You have executor, beneficiary, trustee, but those are just roles. And anyone can fulfill a role. But just because you're fulfilling a role doesn't mean that you actually know how to function inside of that role. And so what became really clear to me when I was working in this particular arena is that trust everywhere operated when you knew who you were, your capacity, you knew exactly who you were functioning inside of the role that you were given, inside of the governance structure, and governance being the laws, the rules, the regulations, reliably over time. So when I started looking at things that were unfolding around me in the province of Nova Scotia, I was like, wait a second. You guys you're not operating inside of your rules. You're not operating inside of your laws. And most notably, it started with Nova Scotia Power. And it started with Nova Scotia Power when the corporation came looking for relief funds for a hurricane. They had something like $25 million in infrastructure damage, and they wanted to go back to the ratepayers in order to secure that money. And in the province of Nova Scotia, our energy provider is a private corporation that is run like it's a monopoly. They're pretty much a monopoly in the province, and they are governed by an energy tribunal. And so anytime they want to do a rate increase, they must go to the tribunal for permission. And so when I first heard they want to come back for the 25 million, my instinct was, well, where in our contract does it say they have the right to come back to us for the maladministration of their business? And I went digging for the contract. And that's when I found out that in the province of Nova Scotia, we don't actually have contracts, tangible physical contracts with our energy provider. I can't go pull up something that shows reliably what the terms and conditions are in our agreement. And it's because rules and regulations have been created inside of the tribunal that has made that optional for the energy provider. There's absolutely no mechanism right now that requires Nova Scotia Power to formalize a contract with their consumers, which is absolutely wild, right? It's wild. And one of the reasons they gave us was that it would just be too voluminous for them to do that, to have to do contracts every time there was a new connection, which is the most ridiculous response I've ever heard, because every telecommunication company can do it, and they change customers more frequently and at a much higher rate than an energy provider will. But anyway, and that particular experience, going through their process, going through the ranks, looking for the contract, communing with the energy board, getting these absolutely ridiculous responses, not being satisfied with them, not being able to find any piece of legislation. So yes, there were rules and regulations that the energy board was operating inside of, but there's nothing in the Public Utility Act, which is what governs their regulations, that condones it. But there's a mismatch, there's a break between what that Public Utility Act says, how the tribunal is operating, and then the people in power who have the ability to correct it and won't. And so that for me is like the basic fundament of trust being broken, because these are people operating inside of roles that we assume are positions of trust, but they're not functioning in trustworthy ways because they don't know who they are. They don't understand the full function of their job. They're not operating truly inside of the governance structures that are created for them reliably over time. And so I started creating a system that allowed me to very quickly evaluate over time and across all sectors of government and private corporations, this formula for very quickly identifying where trust was breaking between either the government and the public, corporations and their customers, corporations and the government. And it really made me realize that we are in a crisis of trust, but that it's something that's 100% fixable. We can fix this at any time. And so how do we go about doing that? Well, it starts when you hear a story that's being presented to you, and you can start to quickly identify the underlying narrative, right? Who's the victim? Who's the villain? Who's the hero in the story you're being told? And can you step out of that and go, okay, I can witness how this is being told to me, the way it's being shaped, what I'm being asked to believe, but I don't know if it's true yet because I don't know if I can trust it. And then understanding the mechanics of trust, of being able to look at, is the information that I'm getting coming from a reliable source? Are they operating inside of their capacity? Are they functioning correctly? Do their documents support what they're telling me? And do they have a track record of consistency over time of telling the truth, of being trustworthy? More times than not, they don't. And so it's a really interesting perception shift that begins to happen when you choose to raise out of the story of the villain, victim, and hero and stand in the function of the witness long enough to be able to stabilize your perception. And the biggest issue that we have right now in the way that stories are conveyed and that narratives are shaped is that you're being asked to believe and trust something so quickly and at such an alarming rate that you don't have time to stabilize and center yourself, right? It's hitting every emotional button, your ideologies, your beliefs, your past traumas, your life experience. And because we live and work at such an accelerated pace now, if you're not giving yourself the time to take a breath, take a minute, stabilize, go, is this even true? Before I start to react and respond to what I'm being shown, we're watching this proliferation of chaos happening around us and trust crumbling around us, that the pendulum swing that's occurring right now is very, very radical. Like, it's incredibly radical. And so what I'm hoping to do as I progress with my work is really start to have these granular conversations where we're looking at very specific issues that are happening. And I'm going to focus mainly on Nova Scotia because it's where I live, it's my community, it's happening in and around me and has a meaningful impact on me. But I want to be able to come on these lives, and I know this one has been a total mess. I'm all over the place right now. And I'm just trying to get my sea legs at the moment because it's been a minute. But I want to be able to take these real world scenarios, these things that are happening in my backyard, and do a meaningful breakdown. Because at the end of the day, what I'm calling the trust effect is capacity, function, governance, continuity. It's the formula that I have identified for trust, the 4 conditions that are at play 100% of the time. And the outcome of those conditions show you, is something trustworthy? Is it not? And why? And it allows you to run a really quick diagnostic on what you're looking at and then go, okay, how do I, as an individual, resonate with what I'm seeing? And how am I participating day in and day out with my time, attention, and energy in the structure that's in front of me? And why am I doing that? And is there something I can do with my time, attention, and energy, how I'm choosing to participate, that can actually start to make meaningful changes, both within myself, in my family, in my community, and in the larger scheme of things? And I've been doing this for the past 2 years, where I've been going on our local talk radio on 95.7 FM. They do an open hour every day. And I've been on there frequently over the last 2 years, kind of giving my 2 cents and my perspective on the local issues. But 5 to 7 minutes isn't nearly enough to be able to talk about the things that matter most to me. And I've spent the last 4 years going deep into some of our systems, and I have extensive communication and information across Nova Scotia Power, the Utility Board, the Department of Education, the Office of the Ombudsman, the Office of the Superintendent of Insurance, the Department of Justice, the Halifax Regional Municipality, their contractors, that show us very clearly where things are breaking and why. And I don't want to have these conversations so that people just take my word for it, because I think that's how we've gotten into the situation that we're in. I want to be able to present information in the way that I do, in a very neutral way, and focusing on the structure instead of the rules and the personalities that are executing the structure, so that we can start to expand the conversation and have more constructive conversations around how we as a collective shift our participation. And it's also really easy to look and see at, it's really easy to look around us and see everything that's wrong. But there's also people in this city and in this province who are doing things so right. They have built incredibly trustworthy businesses. They have become meaningful contributors inside of their community, and they've done it consistently over time. And that deserves just as much attention, if not more, than the problems that we're facing. Because the power of collective attention and time and energy is undeniable. And right now, you'll hear a lot of creators talking about the attention economy and what you have to do to get someone's attention. But you get and hold someone's attention based on how trustworthy you are. And at the end of the day, trust is the greatest currency you have, right? Your word is your bond. How trustworthy you are is your greatest asset. And as I said earlier, it's an inside out proposition. You will never trust anyone or anything outside of you greater than the degree to which you trust yourself. So it always starts within. But the beautiful thing about identifying it outside of yourself is that you start to feel those crunchy feelings on the inside, and it starts to show you where perhaps you have the wobbles, where you don't trust yourself as much as you could or as much as you should. that perhaps you haven't been as trustworthy to other people as you could or should be. And it's not to assign blame and it's not to shame, it's to get radically honest. Because with trust comes deep levels of self awareness, but even deeper wells of self accountability and self responsibility. And when you become so self accountable and so self responsible, it becomes really impossible again to participate in the narratives that sit neatly inside of the villain victim hero loop that we're constantly fed. And it's not that that story is going to go away. That narrative, that way of storytelling, some people call it the hero's journey. It's millennia old. It's been around forever. But you still get to choose your participation in it. And again, you don't have to fit into the roles, the villain, victim, hero role that you're seeing inside of it. You can choose to stand back and be the witness. And so the cultivation of the witness, your ability to halt, your ability to, within yourself, run through honesty, acceptance, loyalty, trust when you're encountering new situations, to ensure that you know who you are, that you know where you're standing, that you understand the agreements that bind you to those places, and that you're operating in them with integrity and trustworthiness to the best of your ability at all times. Doesn't mean you're not going to get it right. Doesn't mean that you're not going to fumble and flounder over time. We all do. But can you course correct? Can you get back on track? Can you see where you can do better next time? Can you begin to close the gap between who you're telling the world you are versus who you're actually being? Because that gap is very wide right now. That's the authenticity factor, right? Who you're being versus who you're telling everyone you are. When you're in the loop of the villain, victim, hero, that's usually when you're finger pointing. But when you're pointing when you're pointing a finger out, you got 3 coming back, right? That 3 is who you tell the world you are, who you're actually being, and the gap between the two. Can you witness that? Can you start to close that enough that you can shift how you are perceiving what's happening around you, stabilize your perception enough that your attention, your time, your energy is not being narrated and controlled by the events that are happening outside of you, because you have now learned to start trusting yourself enough to take a step, take a deep breath, and honestly evaluate whether or not what you are being told is trustworthy or not. So, yeah, it's a bit of a ramble today. I haven't been in front of a camera in about 4 years, and I've tried sitting down to do live scripted videos, and I just can't. I need to be in conversation. So these lives are going to be a little rocky. It's going to take me a minute to find my sea legs. But my goal is to be able to sit here and enter into conversation and speak with you about what you're experiencing in your life, and how the mechanics of trust are operating um, within your relationships, your businesses, your communities, what you're seeing. Because as I said earlier, based on my experience working at the global level inside of these corporations, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, the structure is the same. The roles might look a little different. The language that we use to describe it might be a little different. The languages we speak might be a little different, but the actual structure is always the same. And when you can get to that root level structure and correct it there, it it's really interesting how everything will start to shift around you. So if you've been here, thank you for sticking around. Not sure if it made a lot of sense, but I appreciate you for coming in and for sticking this out with me. And my goal right now is to go live every Tuesday, but with a more precise topic. So next week on Tuesday, I'm going to come in to talk about the hospitals in Nova Scotia. We have a single payer system here, so it's a little different than what you may experience in the US or in other countries around the world. But we have a very interesting system here that starts to unfold when you walk into one of those institutions and something happens and you have to look at them and say, "You hurt me." The response that unfolds from there is one that many people experience, and I don't think they fully understand and appreciate the mechanics of exactly what's at play. And I've just gone through a very interesting process with a local hospital that is in the process of a national fundraising campaign to fix and raise money for an issue that I have evidenced and identified as a structural governance issue in the hospitals. It's something they can't fundraise their way out of. So it's something that I'm looking forward to expanding on next week. And I hope it is something that will provide value, I think, over time, because we have to be able to operate inside of our communities. We have to be able to move through our communities. And if we can't trust each other, then what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And at the end of the day, these institutions are legal fictions. They're just pieces of paper. They get animated by the people who work inside of them day in and day out. And that's why trust will always be an inside out endeavor. That's why you have to become trustworthy, because when you become trustworthy within yourself, it becomes impossible to not act in a trustworthy way. It ripples into our institutions, it ripples into our businesses, it ripples into our communities, because the status quo right now, we're in crisis. We're in crisis in many, many places. And no one is going to magically come in and fix it. No one's going to magically come in and save you. You fix you. You heal you. You save you. And in the process, everyone around you benefits. And there's a saying that I've heard a few years ago, and I love it so much. And it's that when you show up in your world, you allow other people to see their possibilities in your reality. So when you can show up and show people what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, and the outcomes that you're getting, it shifts the narrative enough that it can give someone else the courage and permission to do what they otherwise thought may have been impossible. And so that's my story for today. Again, thank you so much for being here and for tuning into this first ramble. I promise it will get better. It's just going to take some time. But anyway, have a beautiful rest of your Thursday. Forgot what day it was. And I will see you Tuesday morning.